Think your life is hard? You wouldn't last a single day in medieval times. Modern comforts have made us soft, and what medieval people dealt with daily would shock you to your core. Let's talk about medieval food. The stuff that would have you running back to the 21st century faster than you can say McDonald's. First off, forget everything you've seen in movies about grand feasts with giant turkey legs. For regular folk, meals were bland, boring, and often dangerous. Most people ate a diet that was about as exciting as watching paint dry. Peasants lived mainly on something called pottage, essentially a sad, watery soup made from whatever vegetables they could grow, cooked in the same pot for days. It was the medieval version of Mom's mystery stew, except instead of hiding vegetables, it was hiding weevils and dirt. Bread was the main food for almost everyone, but it wasn't the fluffy sliced stuff we enjoy today. Medieval bread was dense, dark, and often filled with all sorts of unwanted extras. The flour used was typically ground between stone wheels that would chip off into the mix. Subscribe and comment for more medieval videos. People back then had stronger teeth, not from good genes, but from constantly chewing on what was basically rock-filled dough. Here's a terrifying fact. Much of the bread contained ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. Ergot poisoning could cause hallucinations, burning sensations, and sometimes death. Some historians believe that ergot poisoning may have contributed to witch hunt hysteria because entire towns would start hallucinating at once. Imagine thinking your neighbor is a witch when, really, your baker just needed to clean his equipment. Meat was a luxury for most people. When they did get it, it was often borderline rotten because there was no refrigeration to mask the taste of spoiling meat. Heavy spices were used if you could afford them. Otherwise, you just held your nose and hoped for the best. The 5-second rule in medieval times was more like the 5-day rule. The worst part? You couldn't even wash down this awful food with water because drinking it would make you sick. Most water sources were contaminated with human waste and other nasty stuff. Instead, everyone, including kids, drank beer or ale. Not the strong stuff we have today, but a weaker version that was safer than water because the brewing process killed germs. One study found that the average medieval peasant consumed about 8 pints of ale per day. Children as young as 5 regularly drank ale with every meal. Medieval kids didn't need fake IDs to drink. They needed them to get water. Fish was another common food, but usually preserved by drying or salting, since fresh fish spoiled quickly. People living by the coast might get fresh fish, but for inland dwellers, fish arrived days or weeks old. The smell alone would knock you out. Salted herring was a staple, and it became the fast food of medieval times. These preserved fish were ready to eat without cooking and packed with enough salt to make you thirsty for days. Herring became the fish of choice for medieval peasants for 3 simple reasons. They swam in huge groups, were easy to catch, and could be preserved with simple salt. Fishing records from medieval times show just how massive the herring industry was. During peak season, a single fishing fleet from Great Yarmouth in England could haul in more than 40 million herring in just a few weeks. That's enough fish to give every person in medieval England 7 fish each. The salt preservation process was quick but smelly work. Fresh herring spoiled within a day, so fishing boats often carried salt on board. Workers gutted the fish, packed them in heavy salt, and stored them in wooden barrels right on the deck. The smell was so strong that herring processing areas of medieval towns had their own districts, safely downwind from where most people lived. For peasants, salted herring became the answer to many food problems. First, it solved the meat ban during religious fasting days. The church banned meat on Fridays during Lent and on many other holy days, sometimes totaling more than half the year. Fish remained allowed, making herring a crucial protein source for those times. Second, herring could travel far from the coast without spoiling. Packed in barrels, these fish reached deep inland, where fresh fish never could. Trade records show barrels of herring moving hundreds of miles from the sea, reaching mountain villages and remote farms. By now, your stomach is probably turning, which brings us perfectly to the next medieval horror, the bathroom situation. For the average person, going to the bathroom meant using a chamber pot, basically just a bowl or bucket kept under the bed. Once filled, you'd either empty it yourself or wait for someone to collect it. Where did they empty it? Usually right out the window and into the street below. The medieval version of Look Out Below wasn't about falling objects, but falling feces. The common practice in towns was to shout, "Gardez-vous," before tossing waste from upper windows. This warning came from the French phrase "gardez-l'eau," meaning watch out for the water. Though, of course, by water, they meant something far less pleasant. This practice was so common that in some medieval cities, the rule was that waste could only be thrown from windows after 10 p.m. If you were lucky enough to visit a castle, you might encounter something called a garderobe, essentially a hole in a stone seat that dropped waste straight down the castle wall. In Dover Castle, archaeologists found a garderobe that dropped waste nearly 70 feet. Kings and queens might have had thrones, but their toilets were just holes with a draft. For those who couldn't wait to get home to their chamber pot, the options were grim. Public areas often had designated spots where people would relieve themselves, creating what we would now call open sewers. In London, there were places called common privies built over rivers, but these were few and far between. The job of collecting and disposing of human waste fell to workers with the unfortunate title of gong farmers. These brave souls would collect waste from cesspits and take it outside the city walls. They could only work at night, and the smell clung to them so badly that they weren't allowed in public gathering places. Despite the awful conditions, gong farmers were actually paid quite well, about 4 times what an ordinary laborer made. The smell of medieval cities was legendary. The River Thames in London was so polluted with waste that it was described as a monster of stink. Toilet paper? Forget about it. People used whatever was available: leaves, moss, their left hand, or if they were wealthy, pieces of wool or hemp. The Romans had actually used sponges on sticks that they would rinse in vinegar or salt water, but that knowledge was mostly lost by medieval times. After spending a day drinking ale to avoid waterborne illness and then finding nowhere decent to relieve yourself, you'd be ready to head back to the 21st century. But the bathroom situation was just one of many brutal realities that made medieval life a daily test of survival. Forget those romantic notions of being a valiant knight or a fair maiden in a castle. In medieval times, most people worked backbreaking jobs from sunrise to sunset with barely enough pay to survive. Most people were peasant farmers who worked the land owned by nobles. Their daily routine involved waking up at dawn, working until dusk, collapsing into bed, and repeating until death. A typical farmer plowed fields using wooden tools pulled by oxen, planted seeds by hand, and harvested crops with basic sickles. During harvest season, peasants worked 16-hour days in the baking sun. Records from medieval England show that a typical farm worker would burn over 4,000 calories daily, just from physical labor. Medieval farmers didn't need gym memberships. They just needed to survive. For those not farming, trades and crafts offered alternative careers, though these came with their own hardships. Blacksmiths spent their days in smoke-filled forges, breathing in toxic fumes and risking burns and eye injuries. Tanners, who turned animal hides into leather, worked with urine and toxic chemicals that turned their skin yellow and gave them terrible smells that followed them everywhere. Want to become a skilled tradesperson? Better start young. Apprenticeships typically began at age 7, when children would be sent to live with a master craftsman. These young apprentices worked 6 or 7 days a week for up to 14 years before they could become journeymen. Medieval career counselors had a pretty simple job selection flowchart. Can you lift heavy things? If yes, farmer. If no, early death. Some jobs were designed specifically for the poor and desperate. Unique roles in society. Link boys were children who carried torches to light the way for wealthy people at night. Purefinders collected dog feces to sell to tanners. The pay for most jobs would barely cover basic survival. A day laborer in medieval England might earn 1 or 2 pennies per day, just enough to buy about 2 loaves of bread. Getting paid minimum wage wasn't a concept. The concept was minimum you need, so you don't die before finishing your work. With such physically demanding work and poor nutrition, the body would wear out quickly. Disease was everywhere. Medicine was practically non-existent, and what passed for healthcare would today be considered torture. Medieval WebMD had just one diagnosis for everything: you're probably going to die. A simple cold or flu that we treat with rest and over-the-counter medicine could be a death sentence. Without understanding of germs or infection, medieval people believed illness came from bad air or an imbalance of the 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Got a fever? Time for bloodletting. This involved cutting open a vein and draining blood into a bowl. Medieval doctors had one solution for everything: you've got too much blood. Let me fix that for you. Leeches were another popular treatment. These blood-sucking parasites were applied to the skin to draw out bad blood. One medical text recommended using 70 leeches at once for certain conditions. The mortality rate from disease was staggering. About 30% of children died before age 5, and the average life expectancy was between 30 and 40 years. The bubonic plague killed roughly 50% of Europe's population in the mid-14th century. Dental problems were particularly awful, with no proper toothbrushes or understanding of dental hygiene. Tooth decay was common. Medieval dentists didn't need appointments. They just waited until someone was screaming loud enough to be heard through town. Even the medicines that were available were often deadly. Mercury was prescribed for everything from skin conditions to syphilis. Their prescription drugs didn't need warning labels about side effects. The side effect was always that it might kill you faster than the disease. The worst part? Many diseases spread because of poor hygiene. Their idea of hand sanitizer was wiping their palms on their already filthy clothes, which is like trying to clean a muddy shoe with a dirty sock. Even if you somehow survived all these medieval medical treatments, your troubles were far from over. Life in medieval times found plenty of other ways to make each day a challenge. Justice in medieval times wasn't just blind. It was downright cruel, unfair, and often completely random. The legal system operated on principles that would make modern lawyers scream in horror. First off, laws varied wildly from one town to the next. What was perfectly legal in one village could get you thrown in a dungeon just 5 miles away. There were no standardized legal codes, and most common people had no idea what was actually against the law until they were accused of breaking it. Medieval Miranda rights consisted of: you have the right to be punished. You have the right to beg for mercy. Good luck with that. The punishment rarely fit the crime. Minor offenses like stealing food when you were starving could result in having a hand chopped off. In medieval England, over 200 different crimes carried the death penalty, including cutting down a tree in the king's forest or stealing property worth more than 12 pence. Trials were nothing like our modern court system. If you were accused of a crime, proving your innocence often involved trial by ordeal. One common method was making the accused carry a red-hot iron bar for 9 feet. If your burns healed cleanly within 3 days, you were innocent. If they became infected, which was almost guaranteed without modern medicine, you were guilty. Another popular method was trial by water. The accused was tied up and thrown into a river or lake. If you sank, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty and executed. The logic? Water, being pure, would reject the guilty. This created a literal no-win situation for the accused. For those found guilty, execution methods were designed to be as public and terrifying as possible. Hanging was actually one of the more merciful methods. Drawing and quartering, where the condemned was dragged through the streets by horses, hanged until nearly dead, disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, and then cut into 4 pieces, was reserved for the worst crimes, like treason. Public executions were community events, often drawing large crowds who brought food and drinks, as if attending a festival. Medieval entertainment options were limited. You could watch someone being executed or stay home and stare at your wall. Most people chose the execution. Nobles rarely faced the same justice system as commoners. If a noble was accused of a crime, they could often demand trial by combat and hire a professional fighter to represent them. Rich criminals could also pay blood money to the victims' families to avoid punishment, while poor people accused of crimes had virtually no defense options. The concept of sanitation in medieval cities was primitive at best. The smell hit you first. Medieval towns were rife with human waste, rotting food, unwashed bodies, tanning chemicals, slaughterhouse remains, and smoke from countless fires. Without garbage collection, trash piled up in the streets or was tossed into the nearest river. Butchers dumped animal entrails and blood right outside their shops. The smell was so overwhelming that people carried small pouches of herbs called panders to hold under their noses. The medieval version of air freshener was slightly less terrible smelling stuff to mask the horrible smelling stuff. Personal hygiene was practically non-existent. Most people bathed only a few times a year, usually in spring and at the end of summer. Many believed that bathing opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. During winter months, people might go 4 to 5 months without washing. Head lice were so common that special combs for removing them were standard grooming tools. Medieval dating profiles would have included moderate lice infestation as a major selling point. Clothing was uncomfortable, rarely washed, and worn until it fell apart. Undergarments were made of rough linen that irritated the skin, while outer garments were heavy wool that itched constantly. Even the wealthiest nobles had only a few sets of clothes. Shoes were made of thin leather with flat soles that provided no protection from the elements. The social hierarchy was rigid and unforgiving, and the feudal system meant everyone had a fixed place, with social mobility being nearly impossible. About 90% of the population were peasants who owned nothing and worked land belonging to nobles. Moving up in station or changing occupations rarely happened. Medieval life was not only physically demanding, but also mentally taxing. The constant struggle for survival could lead to despair and hopelessness. Mental health was not understood in medieval times as it is today. People often attributed mental illness to possession or divine punishment, leading to further stigmatization. Those suffering from mental health issues were often ostracized or even executed, reinforcing fear and misunderstanding. Religion played a significant role in shaping daily life and societal norms. The church provided a sense of community, but also enforced strict moral codes. Fasting and penance were common, often leading to malnutrition and further exacerbating mental health problems. Weather played a significant role in the lives of medieval peasants. Poor harvests due to droughts or floods could lead to famine, causing suffering and death for many households. Medieval farmers depended heavily on the seasons. A bad winter could delay planting, while a wet summer could ruin crops. The unpredictability of weather made farming a gamble, and the stakes were often life or death. Historical records indicate that significant weather events could devastate communities. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, for example, was partly caused by severe weather, resulting in widespread starvation across Europe. The legacy of medieval life is complex. It encompasses not only the struggles and hardships faced by peasants, but also their resilience and adaptability. Many of the principles of medieval living, waste not, want not, are still relevant today. The idea of using every part of an ingredient, from root to leaf, resonates with today's farm-to-table movement, highlighting the importance of sustainability. Peasant dishes, such as pottage and bread, have evolved but continue to be staples in many cultures. The focus on local ingredients and seasonal produce reflects a modern understanding of nutrition and sustainability. The diet of medieval peasants was a testament to their resilience and creativity. Through adversity, they learned to use every resource at their disposal to survive. From pottage and bread to peas and fish, every food tells a story of struggle and survival. Throughout the centuries, these simple meals kept countless generations alive. As we look back at history, it is essential to remember the adaptability and ingenuity of those who lived in difficult times. Medieval cuisine was not just a means of sustenance, it was a way of life that celebrated creativity and community amidst adversity.